Hello, my name is Teresa and this is week 2 of my 100 days of making comics. In the video you can see my process for the design of the main character of my story, and I'll be discussing during the video how I write characters. So this is part 1 of the character design overview that I'm gonna do, and next week I'm gonna be talking about the visual design of the character. Okay, so the first tool that I use to design my characters is a classification that comes from a long time ago. In particular, this was written by Aristotle. In case you don't know, he was a philosopher from ancient Greece, and he was really into theater. At the time, Greece was very prolific when it came to theater. In particular, they did a lot of tragedies. And Aristotle was a big fanboy of these theater plays, and he analyzed them in one of his writings, and he had a section about characters that I find very useful. What he did is he defined character in a very specific way. He said a character is anything that is in charge of moving action. Now, these are not his exact words, but this is the idea. So for Aristotle, a character is both any person that has a role in the play, but it's also anything that moves the story forward. So for example, in the movie Castaway, the storm, which is responsible for taking Tom Hanks to the island, would be a character as it is the first opposition that he encounters. So the storm is a character in that sense. So, having this definition, he then defined 5 types of characters that are necessary in a story. The first one, we're going to start now with the classification, is the protagonist. And now he defines the protagonist as a character that is searching for something, the searcher. This can be literal, such as, for example, if you have King Arthur, he's searching for the Holy Grail, he's searching for an object. But you can have something a lot more abstract, such as in a coming-of-age story, you have a character that is searching for themselves, like for who they really are. So it can be anything, this search. It can be the search for love, the search for an object, the search for a person, the search for revenge, but you have to have your protagonist wanting something and searching something, and the story is the quest to finding this thing. Of course, in a story, you can have more than one protagonist. A good example of this type of stories would be the genre of sitcoms, situational comedies, such as, for example, Friends. In Friends, I would argue there are 5 protagonists. I would say that Rachel, Ross, Chandler, Monica, and Phoebe are all protagonists because they are searching for something, and the show ends when they have found that something. And if I want to be very picky, we can try and boil it down to 1 or 2 characters. It would be either Rachel or Ross, and this is a big conversation that some people are having, like who is the real protagonist of Friends. But I would say overall it's quite balanced because we follow the stories of these characters and their search for something. For example, Chandler is searching, he's on a quest to becoming more mature and less afraid of committed relationships. So the story begins with him being completely unable to start a relationship, and it ends with him in a marriage, with a house in the suburbs, and with everything he was once afraid of and that he now embraces. With Monica, we have a character that is incapable of developing a healthy professional career, and at the end of the show we have her being a very successful cook. In the case of Ross and Rachel, this is even more marked in the script because the story literally begins with Ross sitting in the cafe, having just had a divorce and lost, his position as the main parent of his child, and he's quite sad and he wants to get married and he wants to go back into being in a family. While on the other hand, we have his opposite, which is Rachel, which is coming into the cafe, running away from commitment, running away from a wedding, and trying to find out who she really is outside that bubble of family and commitment. And so the story that follows them is just their journey in searching for these things, which goes full circle, and in the end, Ross and Rachel end up together with a child and pretty much in the same situation as the beginning, but very much improved in the way that they are living their lives. And Phoebe, of course, she starts the show being, a person that has no family, that has no roots, and finish the story as a person that finally has that family stability that she never had in the beginning. Now, I would argue that Joey is not a protagonist, because Joey's quest is to find fame and success as an actor, and he does not fulfill that by the end of the show, and probably that's why they did that spin-off, Joey. So yeah, if you want to have a lot of characters in your story and you want them all to be equally important for the story, you want them all to be protagonists, all you have to do is give them something they're searching for and follow that search until it is completed. Okay, so that was role number 1, the protagonist, the searcher. Now, the second role is the object, and this is that which is being searched. In the case of Friends, as we were saying earlier, that which is being searched would be committed relationships, successful careers, and etc., which is the typical thing that you find in sitcoms when you have 20-something-year-olds, 30-something-year-olds. That's what they're looking for, right? So the object can be anything. It can be something abstract, such as in Friends, where they're looking for career success, or it can be something very physical, such as I said before, Arthur looking for the Holy Grail with his knights. Defining the object, what it is, and how your protagonist gets it is just as important as defining your protagonist. So have a real good think about this object that they're searching for, because how well defined the object is will definitely help define your protagonist and make the story better. Okay, now going on to the third role, which is the role of the helper. Inside the helper, this is a very complex category, and you can have subdivisions. For example, a helper in another classification could be called many things, such as the friend, the mentor, the wise person. I don't know, many names that I've seen around. But I think the helper really encapsulates one big category, which is anyone that helps with the search. So when you are populating your world with characters, one really important thing that you need to do is you need to define what this character is doing to help the protagonist in their search. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because if you have a character that is just nice and funny and is not doing much for the story, well, yeah, it's nice as background noise, but it's not really a useful character. And I would argue maybe you should consider cutting it off the story, because if a character has no role, maybe it's not a good idea to have them there. So when you're creating your secondary characters, think about what's their role in regards to helping the protagonist achieve what they're looking for, achieve their goal, and fulfill their search. And now let's move on to the next one. The fourth role is the opponent. Now, the opponent can be anything. And a lot of people tend to think of opponent as villains. And it's not necessarily the case. A villain would be the type of opponent that you would find in a story where the protagonist is fighting crime in some way. So if your protagonist is not a superhero or a policeman or a detective or anyone that fights evil or crime, then you don't need a villain. One good example of this would be a love story where the opponent is maybe the flaws of that person. So for example, Pride and Prejudice. There is an opponent in that book, but it's not the main opponent. Well, I don't know if you've read Pride and Prejudice or seen Pride and Prejudice, but there is a character that is like the exact opposite of Mr. Darcy, and initially Elizabeth is quite interested in him. But eventually she comes to realize that he's a very superficial man that is only looking for women of wealth to just be a leech and take the family's money. And that's the exact opposite of Darcy. And this is interesting because that's one of the ways in which you can make the villains. You can make villains friends of your heroes that are the exact opposite. This happens in Superman, this happens in a lot of famous villains that are the opposite of the protagonist. But in this particular case, I would argue that the main opponent is not Mr. Wickham, the main opponent would be, as the title says, the pride and prejudice of the main characters. The reason why they can't fall in love initially is because they're too proud and they're too prejudiced. And that is the opponent, which is a funny little twist in the book, because you initially expect the typical story where, Mr. Wickham is the bad man and Elizabeth's stupid and she's not going to realize. No, she's not stupid. She does realize, but still, she's proud and she's prejudiced, and so is Mr. Darcy, and that's what separates them for a long, long time. And that's their opponent. Long story short, you do not need a villain. And if you're a very clever writer like Jane Austen, you can create a fake villain and then have the real villain a little bit more hidden, so that everyone can go like, oh, right, okay, that's a nice twist. Long story short, you want to make a simple villain, make the villain the opposite to your protagonist, and so they're opposing each other directly, as in a struggle. And if you want to be a bit more nuanced, you can create the opposition as just simply a force or a problem or a flaw of the character that is preventing them from getting what they want. And that would be a good opponent without it being a villain. Moving on to the fifth role, which is the last one. And it's a very interesting one. And this fifth role is the role of the confidant. Now, Aristotle got this role from theatre. And if you've ever been to a theatre play or read a theatre play, you know that at some points, they don't show you what's happening. You just have a character that comes into the stage and says like, where is this person? Or what happened during the battle? Just because they're not going to reenact a full battle, or they're not going to show you everything that happened in a faraway land, especially not in Greek theatre, where they wanted always a unity of space, meaning that they never changed the place where the story happens. So it's just people coming in and out of the same space. And in this sense, if anything happens outside of this space or outside of the experience of the protagonist, you would have a character that would come in and say, what happened? And then the protagonist or another character would say, well, this person came and killed Mrs. Blah blah, and then you would be filled in. And so the confidant is any character that is ignorant of something and will ask questions that the audience, the reader, needs to know about, so to understand what's going on. As I mentioned, this is a very useful character, especially if you're writing fantasy or sci-fi, or anything in which the world that you're presenting is not the world that we are used to. Brandon Sanderson talks about the Watson character in this sense. So he talks about characters that, such as Watson in Sherlock Holmes, they don't know what's going on, because Sherlock is brilliant and he can see things that us mere mortals cannot see. And so Sherlock has Watson so that Watson can ask questions such as, how did you know that? Or where are we going? Or what do you see? And then Sherlock can answer, and then the reader is informed about the brilliant observations, and that's a Watson character. They are very useful, as I said, in fantasy and sci-fi, because you can have someone that is uninformed, such as, for instance, Harry Potter. He goes on into the wizarding world and asks Hermione all the time, like, oh, what's this? Oh, how do you do that? And she's like, well, this is this. And it wouldn't make sense if Harry was well informed for someone to ask that question, because in that world, the thing that they're using or the spell that they're casting is obvious. So we need this Watson character so that we are informed about the workings of this fantasy world or this sci-fi world. So how is this classification useful? Well, I find it useful because I can run through the different characters I have. I can, as in a play, assign them roles. So I have this one, and this one is going to have this role, and this one's going to have this role. And just as in a play, if I have a character that is beautiful and I love it and is a fantastic OC, but they do not fit the role for what I need, then that character is not casted. So meaning that I'm not going to use that character. Maybe I'll save it for another story, but this is not the time to shine for this character. So don't be scared to leave your OCs as storyless OCs if they don't fit the role that you need them to play in this particular story. So in conclusion, what I'm trying to say here is that I have one golden rule. And my golden rule is that a character that performs no role or function in a story should not be part of the story. So I know you have a lot of OCs and that they have very shiny hair and colorful t-shirts, but you're gonna have to kill your darlings and leave them aside for now. Maybe one day you will have a story in which they fit fantastically, but not now, because they don't have a role to play in the story. Okay, so now let's move on to another thing that Aristotle said about stories in general that I think applies very well to character design. And that is the idea of verisimilitude. Now that's a big word, right? Verisimilitude is basically that it looks like it's real. That's what it stands for. What does he mean by verisimilitude? He means that characters need to look as if they were real. You can't have a character that acts in a way that is impossible, unrealistic, etc. Now, this is funny that he decided to talk about looking like reality, and I'm sure that if you're a writer of fantasy or science fiction or anything that is not supposed to look like reality, you're saying, well, that doesn't apply to me. Aha, you're wrong. Now, what he means by reality is like it has to be real inside the context of the play. This means that what you need to do is you need to make sure that you are creating characters that make sense and look real inside your story. And what you don't want to be doing is having characters that when they perform actions, people just go, what the hell? Like, that makes no sense. Who would do that, etc. And I'm sure you've been in situations where you're reading something, watching something, and you're thinking, why is this character acting this way? I don't get it. This makes no sense. Nobody would do this at this point. And that's what we call breaking the pact of fiction. Meaning that the writer has written something that makes so little sense that readers are reminded this is a work of fiction, this has been written by someone. And it breaks the spell, it breaks the magic of fiction. This happened to me, I remember very clearly when I went to watch Avatar at the theater. I didn't enjoy the film much, I have to say, because I can't see in 3D, I have a lazy eye, and everyone was like, whoa, and I was like, what's happening? I can't see in 3D. But aside from that, is like there's one character that makes no sense, and every time she was on screen, it was like, what the heck is going on with this character? And this is the character of Michelle Rodriguez. And I find that the moment that I was like ready to leave the theater was when she is right. She's a soldier. She's been in the army, going over distant lands to kill alien creatures and colonize planets, right? That is her job. And when she's there with her helicopter, aiming at this one blue person, and the evil military guy says, kill the blue thing, she's like, that's not why I signed up to the army. And it's like, wait, what? That's not why you signed up to go to foreign lands to kill people? I don't know, it didn't make any sense to me. It's like, you're a soldier, that's exactly what you signed up for. I don't understand you. And it was just, I don't know. At that moment I was like, what's going on? And that's exactly what I'm talking about here with verisimilitude, is that you don't want that character to make no sense inside the context of the story. Okay, and this is it for my ancient Greek wisdom. And now I have things that are coming from me. So my number one rule that I follow is that not everything you know about the character needs to be in the story. I know we spend a lot of time thinking about these characters, that we find out a lot of things about them, and those moments are really cool when you're like, oh, her favorite flavor of ice cream is strawberry milkshake or something. But does that really need to be in the story? Do you really need to tell the reader that bit of information? No, you do not, unless it is really important at one point. And the thing here is, do not overshare, because in the same way that oversharing in real life, when you meet someone, it's uncomfortable and sometimes even boring if someone sits down and tells you everything about themselves. The same happens with characters. So you know these things because you find them out as you are writing, but they don't need to know. And you can pull a J.K. Rowling and create a Twitter account such as Pottermore and say all the pointless stuff that nobody cares about later on Twitter. My number 2 rule is that it's okay to have aspects of the character that you simply don't know about. And I think this actually helps because who knows everything about anybody? No one, I would argue, not even yourself. There are things about yourself that you don't know, and is this mystery element of the human nature that makes us a little bit more interesting than a character. So if you want to make your character more interesting to yourself as you're writing or to your readers, just there are some things that neither you nor the reader needs to know, and it's okay to leave it to the privacy of the character. I like to do that, and I would recommend it. It's fun. My number 3 rule, personal rule, is that characters need to be made simple initially, and if you want to have complex characters, it's something that you have to build. One good example of this is the character of Professor Snape, and I'm sorry I keep going back to Harry Potter, but it's on my mind and it's what I'm jumping to constantly. Professor Snape is presented very simply at the beginning. Is this guy dressed in black, looks dodgy, is rude, he is probably not nice, and we know that, and he's presented very simply as Harry's opponent. Now we're all like, ooh, Snape is a mean guy. And as the story progresses, little by little we get to know this character better, to the point where we start to understand that this is a very complex character, and that he had a relationship with Harry's mom, and that he was bullied by Harry's dad, and that he has this internal struggle because Harry reminds him of his bully and his enemy, but he also reminds him of his love, and blah blah blah. So if Snape was presented in the first book when he came in as this complex character, we would have been like, whoa, hold on. This is too much. You're oversharing, you're making me uncomfortable, and you need to stop. And this is obviously an exaggeration. It would just be weird, as in anybody that sits with you on the first day you meet and tells you all about their inner life, okay? So that's all I have to say about that. Make characters initially simple and build on their complexity. And my number 4 is that not every character needs to be complex. You can have a simple character that performs the role well, and that is absolutely fine. Not everyone needs to be like super complicated and super interesting. And that is it for character creation. I've left a couple of links to things that I found useful in the theory of character creation and character writing. Check out the description if you want to go for it, if you want to check them out. And now I'm going to talk about my week, because this is part of the 100 days of making comics, and this week was difficult, so I'm going to talk about that. So this week was difficult because I've been ill since Thursday, and then on Saturday I recorded this audio for the first time, and then my computer crashed and I had to record it again, and I have a temperature and I'm not feeling well, but I'm having to go to work, and it's just, when you have a cold and you're ill and you have a bit of a temperature, so you're not ill enough to stay at home, but you're not well enough to perform your daily duties correctly. So that's been my week since Thursday, and it's not nice. So that's all I have to say about that. Other than that, the fact that I lost my files and some of the files of my footage got corrupted was an extra frustrating bit. So, it's been a good week, but on the technical side or on my health side, not great. But, I've done my half an hour every day, and I'm happy that I did that. And, I'm just hoping that I'm going to get well soon and I can get on with my comic making. Also, I've finished, as you can see in the video, designing my main character. I'm quite happy with her. I've been doodling her on a piece of, on my sketchbook. quite a lot. She's really fun to draw, and that's one of the main things I look for when I design. But I'll talk about that next week. And I was also watching Sabrina, the Netflix show, which is quite fun to watch. And I got a lot of ideas for the props, and I did sketch some props out while I was watching that. So yeah, the design process and the planning process is almost, well, it's not nearly finished. And I need to go back to thumbnails and review them. But so far, so good. I just wish I didn't have this horrible cold. And so I hope I will get better soon. And that's all I have to say about my uninteresting daily life. I was also playing Dungeons and Dragons on Sunday, and it was fun. But yeah, I really don't know how people vlog. Like, there's nothing to say. I'm not an adventurer. There's nothing really to say about my life. I just go to work, come back, draw comics, make dinner, put a wash on, etc. So yeah, I hope you're all well and that you're doing good with your challenge, and I will see you next week. Until then, make comics, have fun, and bye-bye.